So a lot of people would like
Yeah.
to say like God is like a perfect being, and a perfect being would like have things such as like omniscience or sovereignty. And some people may say, well, open theism kind of conflicts with that narrative by saying, well, God actually isn't omniscient, and there are things kind of like maybe that might occur outside of his control. If like
Mhm.
people, he can't like control people's free choices. So how would you respond to that kind of objection?
Yeah. Those objections are extremely common. I think both of them ultimately are straw men. Uh, um, you know, first to start with omniscience, there are some open theists who I think have unwisely uh, framed the position in such a way as to say that God knows all that is knowable, while leaving
Mm,
open that there are some truths about future uh, about the future that simply aren't knowable.
mm,
Uh, that way of framing it walks right into this objection
mm,
because it says, well, hey, there are truths that not even God can know. Well, how
mm,
then can God be omniscient? At least,
yeah.
as that's been traditionally understood. Uh, I would say most open theists don't take that line. Okay. We'll say something like this. We'll say, uh, well, there just isn't any such thing as a complete true story of the future. Insofar as the future is open ended, the shape of the future is yet to be determined, uh, is yet to be decided. And so there is no fact of the matter about what will happen for God or anyone to know. There just isn't a truth there. There are truths about what might happen or what might not happen or what maybe probably will happen, but not what truths of the sort that this categorically will happen or
Mm,
categorically will not happen. It's we're talking the realms of mights and might nots,
mm,
of possiblies and probablies. Um, uh, so would say it's precisely because the future is genuinely open-ended that God knows it as such. And God knows all truths, including the mights and the might nots and the probablys and the perhapses and stuff. And so God is fully and unqualifiedly omniscient.
mm,
There's nothing in open theism requires us to admit that there are truths that God can't or doesn't know. Where we differ from, we may call the non-open or the traditional uh, 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 or the traditional view is not about whether God is omniscient, but about uh, about the content of God's omniscience.
mm,
Okay, we
mhm,
think that the content of God's omniscience includes a lot of mights and maybes, and doesn't, uh, uh, yeah, and isn't as determinate when it comes to future contingents as the traditional view would have it.
mm. Yeah, that's very good. The next kind of objection that we'll look at is like maybe open theism is too risky. Oh, did you think you want to add again? I'm sorry if I cut
Yeah,
you off.
because you had mentioned omniscience and sovereignty. So
Yeah,
I
yeah. Sorry.
addressed the omniscience part, but not the sovereignty issue. So
Hmm.
can I
Yeah.
speak to that
Go
a
ahead.
bit?
I'm so sorry.
All right. So a lot, uh, especially of the more of the Calvinist detractors to open theism, charge it amounts to denial of God's sovereignty because it allegedly means that God is not ultimately or fully in control.
Hmm.
So, for example, you have someone such as R.C. Sproul has famously said in one of his books, with regard to that, just the very idea of causal indeterminacy in nature. And here we're not even talking about libertarian freedom, just the fact of there being any kind of indeterminism. He says, if there is one single molecule in this universe running around loose, totally free of God's sovereignty, then we have no guarantee that a single promise will ever be fulfilled,
Mm,
says R.C. Sproul. Uh, I think that claim is actually quite extreme and perhaps even hyperbolic. If he's right, then any type of free will theism, any type of Arminian or Molinist view, or what have you, denies God's sovereignty, because God's not, in his view, it seems to be theistic determinism or bust. For God to be truly sovereign, he's got to be ultimately controlling every single thing that happens. God has to micromanage. In response, I would simply ask, well, what if God wants creaturely freedom? What if that's his sovereign will? What if God wants there to be an open-ended future?
Yeah.
Can't God sovereignly decide to create a world like that? If so, then free will theism and open theism don't deny God's sovereignty, they affirm it. We could agree with Sroll on the fact of God's sovereignty. Where we differ is on whether God is able to exercise that sovereignty by creating genuinely free creatures. In denying that God is so able, Sproul ironically opens himself up to the charge of denying God's omnipotence. So I would say the future is open-ended because God wanted it that way, and it's only as open-ended as God wanted it to be. And God is smart enough to anticipate and to plan around all possible creaturely decisions. So there's no chance that God can be caught flat-footed or off guard by creaturely freedom. If need be, in fact, he can step in whenever he wants and limit creaturely freedom or channel things in a different direction. Like, for example, he did at the Tower of Babel. He saw, these people were collectively, trying, to build these projects to reach heaven. He said, nah, I don't like where that's going. I'm going to mix up their languages and, channel things in a different direction here.
Yeah.
So he can remain in overall control without needing to micromanage every single thing that happens.